Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 149 of the podcast for May 31st, 2012. My guest today is Dr. Gregory Jacobson. He is the co-founder and CEO of KaiNexus, a startup technology company. And I've been part of the management team at KaiNexus for the past year, so I want to state that conflict of interest right up front. But we're really going to be talking about Greg's early experiences with Kaizen in emergency medicine settings, more so than we're talking about the company or software in this episode. Greg attended Baylor College of Medicine from 1997 to 2001, and then he later completed a residency in emergency medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he stayed on as a faculty member. And starting in 2004, he started doing work applying Kaizen principles, creating a basic software tool at Vanderbilt that ultimately led to the founding of KaiNexus. He's the co-author of a published article called Kaizen, a Method of Process Improvement in the Emergency Department, that was in the journal Academic Emergency Medicine. And if you want to learn more about our company, you can go to www.kainexus.com, or you can go to www.makingimprovementeasier.com, which we think ironically is easier to spell, and that will get you to the front page of our company site. So as always, I want to thank you for listening. If you want to comment or want more details, you can also go to leanblog.org/149. Well, Greg, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for taking time to talk.
Thanks for inviting me.
So we're going to talk a lot today about your use of the Kaizen methodology in healthcare. If you can first introduce yourself and your professional background for the listeners.
Yeah, I'm an emergency medicine physician, graduated and practiced at Vanderbilt Emergency Medicine Department in Nashville, Tennessee. And in that time, got interested in Kaizen and Lean, and have co-founded and am the CEO of a company called KaiNexus.
And it's always interesting to me when people from a medical background or any healthcare professionals really get introduced to Kaizen or Lean. So can you tell the story about how you even first got exposed to these ideas?
When I finished my residency and started at the faculty position at Vanderbilt, the chairman of the department, Dr. Corey Slovis, handed me Miyazaki Imai's formidable book, Kaizen, that came out in the mid-'80s, that introduced many of these concepts for the first time to the Western world. And that really kicked things off for me getting exposed to Kaizen.
And so, why did he give you the book? It seems like it's just kind of like, wow, out of the blue, here's a book written by, a Japanese author. How did that come to be?
Yeah, I was always the resident that was questioning really processes type things. I didn't understand that there were processes, but I would always ask, why are we doing it this way? Wouldn't it be more efficient if we did it this way? And so he recognized that, the nature of who I was always looking for little ways to improve. And he really felt that Kaizen was a great underlying principle and architecture for taking this in a very formalistic way. We were looking for ways to train our residents to take formalized improvement methodologies into their future practices. So he handed me the book, and I took it from there.
Yeah, it's good that he would give you that book. A lot of health organizations, you would have been considered a pain in the neck, right? You're asking too many questions about things.
It's fortunate I was in a department that was really trying to foster a culture of constantly being better, because as we know, we're so busy in healthcare that sometimes we lose sight of the big picture, and we're just trying to fight the little fires. So yeah, it's fortunate.
Yeah. So what was it? So you read Mr. Imai's book, and I'm grateful for his work and his contribution. For my own career and work. What was it in the book, the things that jumped out or resonated with you that would be applicable where you were in the emergency department?
So I was reading the book. Obviously that book it's not geared towards healthcare.
Right.
It's very manufacturing based and focused. But I'm a conceptual thinker in general. So as I was reading the book, I couldn't help but realize that many of the same underlying principles of, very complex systems, highly, either trained or educated people, work on things like cars, and all those things are exactly in healthcare. So I started to realize that, if I was going to train and teach residents in this, I needed to distill the book down to about 12 or 13 principles. And I distilled it down to things that just made sense. For example, decreasing variability in the system, and giving the workers the power to change their workplace because they're the expert in what they do. So those are a couple of examples of the points I try to take from Emai's teachings and apply them into healthcare.
All right, so how did you get started with Kaizen in terms of taking action yourself, educating colleagues? Where did you start?
So I realized that one of the fundamental pillars of a Kaizen program is that you need a suggestion-based system. One, people need to be educated on the principles, and two, you need an actionable suggestion-based system. So at that time, it was two emergency departments. We had an adult side and a ped side. The adult side alone has 55 beds in it. There's, sometimes 4 or 5 attendings, 8, 9 residents, 20, 30 nurses. So we really have a pretty large department, very fragmented in terms of, we're obviously an emergency department, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And the space is also, pretty large. So I realized underlying a lot of the problems was this huge communication barriers that exist within departments as well as between departments. So my first thought was, where would I even, put a physical suggestion box or put the forms in? We, at that time, were doing a whole bunch of stuff with computers. Vanderbilt was on computer order entry back in 2001. The emergency department by 2004 was almost completely computerized. So looking at the computer as developing the process and developing a communication tool just made sense.
And it's funny you mentioned suggestion boxes, because I know we've talked about this a lot, how the Kaizen model is very different from a suggestion box. One of the things I've seen is problematic is that somebody drops something in the suggestion box and they're like, yep, my work is done. They wash their hands of the idea, or the organization has taken ownership of that idea from them. That suggestions are something that they are supposed to do, whether they is the managers or some other department. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on in practice there at Vanderbilt, how is Kaizen different from the way people might view traditional suggestion boxes?
Yeah, that's interesting, because when you initially start thinking about Kaizen and someone describes it to you, you do think of the traditional suggestion box where you fill out the form and you put it in there, and then in a very batchy way, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, they get reviewed at a committee, and people either vote up or down things. Whereas if you really start understanding what companies like Toyota were doing, the suggestion is just the beginning of that process. So a lot of times, an employee, staff member is going to identify a problem with the process or identify a pain point, and they're probably going to have some idea of what they think should be done. And then instead of that, literally being, a one-step process, a Kaizen-minded system would be the beginning. So you start having this banter and you start working. So the individual staff members, the experts, starts working with the leaders and the managers who actually have the ability to institute changing work practices to figure out how can we solve this pain point. Maybe we've identified and that there is a problem and haven't quite figured it out. So then through this working process and really some of these are, when we're talking about a working process, we're not talking about, sometimes it's just a 5-minute quick conversation. And sometimes things would get longer, but that's one of the fundamental shifts of thought. The other major fundamental shift of thought is that these ideas and feedback needs to happen very quickly. As soon as you start causing long delays in answering things. You lose people's motivation, and it starts becoming more like the traditional suggestion boxes that people have found to not work very well. So,
yeah. So you talk about taking action, being able to take action. Norm Bodek, who is also I consider a mentor of mine, and he's been on the podcast a number of times. He always one expression I've learned from him was that ideas are things that I can do. I guess
right.
We say there's no I in team, there is an I in idea, but it's not just everybody running around and doing their own thing. That you've got collaboration and interaction and discussion. So do you have some examples of how somebody even say a physician or a resident, if they have an idea, what that Kaizen process looks like? I mean, they have a manager. Do they go to their chief? How did that work?
Sure. So the system, and it evolved over a number of years. It started almost as an electronic suggestion box system where you would enter the Kaizen and into the computer web-based program, and it would get shot off in emails. And ultimately, we realized that trying to manage these things with emails doesn't really work very well. So we started to develop a workflow, and we developed that workflow because we needed to make sure that we responded to every single suggestion that was put in, every single Kaizen, and we did it in a timely manner. So the system would work something to the effect of the end result, I should say, of the system, once we started to realize how to do this the right way, is someone would put the idea in, or the Kaizen in, and it would go to the chairman. The chairman would take a look at it and then assign it to the key players. Sometimes it's assigning it to himself. Sometimes it's bringing some of the nursing leaders or other nurses into it. They will then evaluate, they'll communicate back with the author, they'll give updates. When those updates happen, everyone's getting, all the key stakeholders are getting looped in, and then when it's concluded, whatever the conclusion is of that Kaizen, not only does all the key stakeholders get updated, not only does the author get updated, but it actually disseminates that information to the entire department. So the department understands that, wow, Mary had this idea, and Tom listened to the idea, and Brenda and Chris worked on the idea with Mary, and it's a collaborative process, and people start to see that instead of a blame culture and complaining, you start to own the processes and start to look for solutions instead of complaining about problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, and you at Vanderbilt, you started immediately, or basically immediately, with an electronic process for managing this, where, a lot of people, and a lot of my original, a lot of my work that I did in departments was with bulletin boards, idea boards, cards. It was just sort of a natural thing to do that as a web-based system that you had built there at Vanderbilt. Can you tell us about how some of that came to be?
I'll be honest, Mark, when I started to think about how to do it, it never crossed my mind to do it any other way than electronically. Because one of the things that was going on is I was an all-nights person. So I was working, I just like working night shifts. So I was working all night. So, I will go many, many shifts without seeing the administrators and the leaders. And I also tended to get frustrated with emails because it's really hard to organize and to be accountable in an email system. So realized it needed to be a transparent system. It needed to have 100% accountability. And so in a paper system, I didn't even know where to physically put the paper system. Is it in the administrative office? Is it on the ped side? Is it on the adult side? And then are we going to manage 3 separate? So I was immediately attracted to looking at this electronically. I talked to a couple other places at Vanderbilt that were doing some suggestion-based improvement work, and they said that they had collected 800 of these on paper, and they just couldn't even begin to organize them. And so when I started to talk to them about how I was doing this electronically, it's an immediate solution when you start thinking about how do you scale something like this. If you have 50 people, paper seems to be great, but if you have 500 people all in different places, and then you want to do this over many years where you can start searching and looking for trends and seeing if people have had this problem in the past, doing it electronically just makes sense.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we'll come back when I hear a little bit more, about that process and how it evolved. But can you share some of the early examples when we talk about, kind of like the, classic Kaizen type improvements that were made? Do any of those come to mind?
Yeah. So I think it's important when you roll out your Kaizen program that there needs to be some training involved. Okay. A classic suggestion system, is going to foster really big, innovative, large in scope ideas. So when you give people just some basic training, you start getting some great examples. So I'm going to give you two examples of just, these are beautiful Kaizens, and these people came up with these Kaizens after very little training. So there was a Kaizen that got put in by an attending resident team that they noticed that when patients would go to the bathroom and they had an IV, that it was very awkward. Where do you hold the bag? Oftentimes, someone's trying to put it on the sink or on the handicap handrail. Inevitably, it's falling on the floor. So now you have an IV going into someone's arm with tubing and a bag on the floor. It's just dirty. So they have a very simple idea. Let's put a coat hanger up in the bathroom, so when a patient goes to the bathroom, they can they can hang their IV bag there. So
there's a hook on the wall.
Hook on the wall. Yeah. So great example of a low cost, low risk improvement that probably affects patient satisfaction as well as patient safety. Another great example was someone realized that if you ordered on the computer a foot X-ray off of the in the non-traditional way in the computer system, that instead of using the ER ordering templates, you used a non-ER ordering template, that it would only give you a 2-view foot X-ray instead of a 3-view foot X-ray. And so that creates delay, because by the time the physician realizes it's 2 views instead of 3 views, it's an extra hour built into that process with transportation and whatnot. It's another great example of someone noticing something that probably the department leader or administrator isn't going to pick up on that, but would love to fix that problem.
Well, I mean, that's when you talk about. I don't even know the first difference between a 2-view and a 3-view X-ray, other than there's 1 view more. I guess that's better, but that just goes to show why you need everybody that's involved in their own work participating in Kaizen, because some sort of outside expert or internal improvement team isn't going to discover things like that. And it seems to really speak to the power of Kaizen and getting everybody involved in their own areas of expertise and working together within their team, right?
Absolutely. And I think the key is that if you give everyone a stake in the game, inherently people want to make things more efficient. They want to have a stress-free workplace. They want to provide great patient care to people. And if you bring them to the table to say, hey, let's improve this, amazing things can happen.
Yeah. So, that idea, I think to people like you and me and a lot of the listeners, improvement, wanting to participate in improvement is something that we're accustomed to and we're excited by. But, we often get a lot of questions people ask, especially, well, how do we engage physicians in Lean, or how do we engage them in Kaizen? And, I learned early on when we first started talking that, you had started with the doctors. And so I'm curious, somebody asked that question, how do we get the docs engaged? Is there anything different that you have to do to engage physicians, or is it the kind of the same process regardless of who you're trying to get involved in Kaizen?
I think that the things that detract doctors are things that are complicated, that's going to take a lot of time. And I think things that decrease barriers for doctors are making it simple and not making it take a lot of time. So I started with the doctors in doing this. And so obviously the system I created ultimately had some of those elements, because I thought, well, how would I want to interact with this? So for example, I think if you have a form that takes 10 or 15 minutes to fill out, the doctors aren't going to be interested in doing that. So make it simple, make it quick, takes them a minute or two to fill something out. And also, requiring a lot of meetings that are in the middle of the day is also going to detract from doctors. So trying to limit, hey, you got to be here on Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're gonna start getting a lot more doctor participation, and a couple easy quick hits, So show them, hey, a small little investment of this time will actually make you more efficient, and make you less frustrated going through your workday. So.
Yeah, because I mean everyone's busy, and you say, well, don't take too much time out of a doctor's day. You would hear the same thing from nurses, and that we need to be respectful of the time, and like you said, make Kaizen. Norm Boydett calls it quick and easy Kaizen, because we're trying to find things that are relatively quick and easy to implement, as opposed to everybody, let's identify a big 6-month-long project that we could all do.
Right,
we know those, or let's form another committee. I mean, that sometimes we do have problems that require that, but we can really get people engaged in some of that smaller stuff that adds up to a big impact.
And another interesting thing is, so a lot of these Kaizens that get put in get solved immediately, but some of them that seem easy end up taking a lot of time and are pretty complex. And if you have a system that kind of shows the complexity, and you engage the authors with that, they start to realize that, wow, this, my leadership is working really hard to make things easier for me and make things more efficient and give better patient care. But sometimes these are really complicated systems to try to do that in. So that was actually an unintended consequence of making a very transparent system that included everybody, that people realized just sometimes how hard some things can be. And the other amazing thing was just how easy other things are. So, it's funny.
Yeah. So, I think we'll do another podcast and get into more of the details of, KaiNexus, the work that we're doing together with different organizations. But I was wondering if you could at least kind of set up that future discussion and talk about, the transition from having a homegrown piece of software at Vanderbilt and how that ended up becoming a startup company that we now have as KaiNexus.
So once we started to get some traction and some momentum, we spread from the residents to the faculty, ultimately to the nurses, then we spread to the peds ED, and it became obvious that Kaizen has a role in improving healthcare, and the idea and the methodology that we came about was bigger than just the Vanderbilt Emergency Department. Also realized that the technology that we built was it was a prototype, essentially a prototype. It was just homegrown software, and it didn't scale very well. So realized that that really the best way to impact healthcare here would be to provide a program that any hospital could use, and not just one department in that hospital, but could model and adapt to any medical center. So it became obvious that we needed to start a startup and to build it and see if we could provide this and solve the difficulty of implementing these type of programs by providing the software. And so we've been successful in building something that's adaptable to any hospital, and it makes improvement easier.
Yeah, and as I stated up front at the beginning, the conflict of interest disclosure is a pretty obvious one, that I am part of the KaiNexus team and believe strongly in Greg's, in your vision and what we're trying to accomplish together. So, people feel free to reach out to me through the blog in different ways if you want to talk about this. And I know, Greg, you would probably be, I know you'd be more than happy to talk to people. How can they reach you if you want to share some of that contact info and how they can find you on the web and email, places like that?
So our web address is KaiNexus.com, and that's spelled KaiNexus.com.
And let me just jump in and reminded, we did a Kaizen for the listeners around our URL, because KaiNexus is short, but like Greg had to spell it. You can also go to makingimprovementeasier.com, which is more to type out, but we don't have to spell it for you. So that's one of our Kaizens. But I'm sorry, go on with contact info.
Yeah. So there's really a ton of information on our website. You can actually reach me directly at greg@kainexus.com. So just greg@kainexus.com. Be happy to answer any questions. We can do a live demo very easily from your office. So excited about this, and guess my some of my parting words, Mark, would be, Kaizen doesn't have to be complicated, and whether you decide to use an electronic system or a paper system, there's no better time to start doing this type of work than now. So please take a look at these concepts in general. I think they're going to be a big part of getting healthcare to where it needs to be.
Well, great. And thank you, Greg, for your hard work and leadership on this topic, trying to help continuing spreading Kaizen and improvement throughout healthcare. So thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.